The LG G6 is one of my favorite smartphones of all time. It was announced in February 2017 with the main novelty of reducing the bezels to offer a slimmer and sleeker design, and for that reason it was, in my opinion, the true successor to the LG G2 and G3 smartphones. The G6 had a lot in common with. LG with the G6 brought back the taller 18:9 aspect ratio from the LG Chocolate, got rid of the plastic of previous models, and went for a more premium look, bringing for the first time glass and metal on an LG phone, as well as water resistance, but in the process putting an end to the removable battery era. I bought the LG G6 for my birthday on August 12, 2017 at a price of $600. And even though the LG G6 has depreciated so much, you can find it for less than $100, I still think it was an excellent investment because I used this device as my daily driver for almost 4 years, from August 2017 up until March 2021, when I finally bought an LG V40, which is the phone I'm using right now to make this video. As you can see, I still have the original box, which included many interesting things like a pair of nice Tone Infinite headphones, which are still new in the box, a 6500 mAh power bank, a box that contained a case and a card with redeemable items for video games, and a 64GB microSD card. Inside the second box we've got the phone on top, along with some documents and SIM card tool, then the headphones that I never used, and lastly the charger and the USB-C cable that still work well 4 years later. Coming from an LG G4 and a Galaxy S4, the change was massive, especially in the processor and battery department, areas where it saw a massive improvement. But still, LG was heavily criticized at the time for using the older Snapdragon 821, which is the processor used by flagships the prior year, and not the Snapdragon 835. But to be fair, it wasn't really LG's fault here, as there was a limited supply of that processor, and Samsung, as the bigger manufacturer, claimed the entire initial supply, forcing LG to either wait or go for an older processor. Anyway, I would have loved if it came with the Snapdragon 835, because I still use the G6 even to this day as my secondary phone, and that extra processing power would have improved greatly my experience with this phone over the past 4 years, experience I will share in this video. The first thing that I'm gonna show is its aspect, where it has aged the most. The frame has some scratches and some small dents. Besides, the glass on the front and back is broken, which is the result of 2 devastating falls. Despite all of that, the G6 proved to be very resilient, honoring that military resistance. In the past 4 years, I've taken my G6 to rivers, pools, mountains, the beach, and even the sea, where it survived salty seawater like a champ. But then in April of 2020, I dropped my phone from 3 meters high and I broke the screen. It happened when I was taking photos of a conjunction between the moon and some planets, when my tripod gave way and my phone hit the ground so hard that the screen glass shattered. Though the glass on the back survived, that didn't stop me from feeling upset with myself, because it was the first phone that got broken. The phone had previously survived a few relatively strong falls at chest height, even once it hit the corner of a brick, and survived with minor scratches, but I guess my luck had ruined one day. On the other hand, the back glass I guess was already somewhat weak, and in November of last year I dropped it from a table to the floor and then it finally broke. But despite all this damage, the screen still works perfectly. It does not have ghost touches or anything weird. Besides, it's really not that noticeable. However, in my experience, the worst aspect about this phone is the camera lens, which has some kind of oleophobic or anti-reflective coating. The truth is, I don't know what it really is, but what I know is that it slowly gets scratched over time, and 3 years later, the quality of the photos had gotten considerably worse compared to when I just bought it. And that's where I decided to consult with the internet, and I found several posts, many of which said that removing that coating, the camera would recover the original quality. So with a polisher, I removed the coating of the main camera, leaving the wide-angle camera for later because at the time it was still fine. And as you can see in this picture, it's noticeable between the side that still has the coating and the one that doesn't. But when I tested the camera, I was shocked to see that the photos were blurry, as if there was some kind of fog in the shots. And this was not because the glass was scratched, it was almost perfect. So I suppose the camera software was designed to work without coating on, and when I removed it, that software damaged the photos since the photos I took with a wide angle camera did not have that problem. Fortunately, this is a relatively easy fix. The camera lens cost around $6, and with the help of a heat gun, it could be easily replaced. But the thing is, they shouldn't have added that coating in the first place. So if you have an LG G6, I don't advise you to remove the coating if it only has minor scratches. But if the state of the lens is so bad, maybe you could give it a try. And if it doesn't work, then you can go for a replacement. Another negative aspect of this device is when temperatures are around freezing, which cause the phone to shut down after a short amount of time if you don't keep it warm. Sometimes on colder days, I would leave my phone on the table to charge, and then the next morning when I go pick it up, I would find it dead, forcing me to warm it up before using it, which was kind of annoying, and sometimes it would even turn off when it was warm inside my pocket. So when I go to a really cold place, I had to carry a phone pouch to keep it warm. Also, when it's cold, the battery drains super fast. For example, a couple of times it's happened that I have my phone in my pocket, and when I want to use it, I notice the phone is off even when moments ago it had over 50% battery left. When that happened to me for the first time, I thought the phone turned off because of the cold and that it still had battery left and only needed some heat. But when I got to a warm place and charged it, I noticed the battery had completely drained. And yes, I know this is normal when it's cold, but this device in particular is much more susceptible to the cold than other phones because it even happens when it's just slightly above freezing. I don't know, maybe it's just my unit, because I've exposed my LG V40 to temperatures of 14 degrees below freezing and it didn't turn up one time, and the battery wouldn't die nearly as quickly as the G6 did in similar conditions. And the last negative thing to point out is the fingerprint sensor that stopped working in 2019, less than 2 years after I bought it. Back then it didn't have any major faults, so I really don't know why it stopped working. And even the option to add fingerprints disappeared from the settings menu. I performed a factory reset and updated it to Android 8, and still the fingerprint option was nowhere to be seen. I performed a hardware test using the built-in app Smart Doctor and I got no response from it, so probably the sensor was damaged somehow. As for the battery, after 4 years it gives me around 3 to 5 hours of screen on time depending on what I'm using at the moment, being clearly worse than in 2017 when it used to give me between 5 to 7 hours of screen on time. But considering that 4 years have passed, it's not bad either. But I have to say that I took care of the battery. For example, I try not to charge it above 80% or let it discharge below 20%. And the temperate climate from where I live helps preserve the battery. The screen on the other hand still looks good in my opinion. In 2017 many reviewers complained about the screen not being AMOLED, but from my perspective 4 years later, I think it was actually an advantage to have IPS and not OLED, and the reason is called burn in. AMOLED screens over time lose that brightness and those vibrant colors so characteristic of the screens. My cousin for example has a Galaxy S8, which he bought same year I did my G6, and the screen looks awful with all the worn out pixels and the navigation buttons, and the keyboard burned into the screen. However, the G6 screen is not problem free. For example, when I leave it for a while showing a fixed image, the screen tends to retain the image. This usually happens when the brightness is above 50%, but doing something else or turning off the screen for a while, and the screen goes back to normal quickly. Now, speaking of software, the G6 came out with Android 7 and it went on to receive Android 8 and 9. But the thing is, the latter runs worse compared to the previous versions. And despite Android 9 brought a bunch of interesting new features, the update was watered down by LG and its UI, so it doesn't look much different than Android 8, but at the same time keeping the increased requirements, so as a result the phone is laggier on its latest update. So if you have a G6, I don't recommend upgrading to Android 9, as not only is the performance worse, but speaker sounds a little quieter for some reason. Though with this I'm not saying the phone is unusable on Android 9, but performance wise it really does get worse. In my case I have it on the Android 8, since this update brought back the option to hide the navigation buttons, because I don't like them taking up space all the time. I don't know why they removed that option in the first place, since the LG G4 already had it, and even the V30 with Android 7 had that function. Anyway, they brought it back on Android 8, and despite Android 8 being a bit slower than the Android 7, the trade was worth it because it got some extra features like the option to hide buttons, night mode for the camera, and picture-in-picture. GPS works really well. I use it for Strava and it detects my location fast, and it does not lose track of me, plus it can be used to measure altitude, information that is delivered quickly. Performance wise it's good. For social media apps like Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp or TikTok you will not have any problem, with the only exception of Snapchat, which is kind of laggy, especially when applying certain filters. The application itself is usable, but as you can see it struggles with some interactive lenses. Another thing is that from time to time in the interface you will notice some lag, either in the animations or when opening applications like Chrome and hundreds of tabs I've opened, or when you're running something heavy in the background, or when the phone was just turned on like in this case. Favorite apps like Lightroom run decently on this device, but performance could be better since it takes some time to apply some filters or when exporting photos, but it's no big deal. When it comes to video editing, it struggles a lot. This 27-minute video for my Dragon Ball channel that had many layers, animations and videos took a long time to export, so in the end I got an error that said to close up and try again. I have to say though, the video resolution was 4K 60. I tried to lower it to 4K 30 and still gave me an error, so I had to lower it even more to 1080p 60 and the standard bitrate to be able to export that video. Though to be fair, that project was really heavy, but I have to say this is common with videos of more than 15 minutes, but not so long videos with few assets. This phone is capable to export them at 4K 60, so if you're gonna use the G6 to join 3 or 4 videos together, it will not give you problems. But if you want to make a long video with many layers at 4K 60, then this phone will not meet that demand. So for video editing, this phone is really not that good. Gaming wise, the G6 is capable of running almost anything you throw at it. Casual games like Clash Royale, Brawl Stars, Temple Run and more run with little to no lag. It also performs very well with heavier games like Max Payne, GTA Vice City, San Andreas, Bully, Dead Trigger 2, Dead Space, Mass Effect and many other games. More recent titles like Call of Duty Mobile or Free Fire Max also run well. In this case I'm playing Call of Duty Mobile with everything on high and performance is good. There are a few frame drops here and there, but it's perfectly playable. However, there are games that don't run perfectly, such as PUBG, that lag when everything is set on max, but if you lower the graphics settings to medium or low, the lag goes away, and honestly in my experience, there's not much difference between extreme or medium graphics, so in my case I would prioritize frame rate over graphics. Minecraft works quite well, but when you raise the chunks above 10, the game lags like crazy. In this case I think it's due to poor optimization, because even my 2014 VIA Shield tablet runs this game much better. But I also have to point out this map in particular is really demanding, as regular maps run better than this. Another game with frequent frame drops when maxed out is League of Legends, but unlike Minecraft, this game is playable on max settings. But once again, with the graphics set on medium or high, performance is nearly perfect.
We fight for those who cannot.
Life Strange, which is a game ported from the PS3 to Android, runs really well, although from time to time it has frequent frame drops, especially after playing for a long time.
Cujo. That layer of dust is begging.
Now when it comes to games that are super heavy, as in the case of Dead by Daylight, on max settings performance is bad, so for it to be playable and have a stable frame rate, you would have to lower the graphics to low. Genshin Impact on the other hand is playable with graphics settings on low and some on medium, but cinematics for some reason turn black and only the audio is played. And this issue is not unique to this phone, and it only happens with cinematics because cutscenes play just fine. Fortnite, which took up almost half of my storage, runs horribly even when everything is set on low. It's below 20 frames per second almost all the time, so this game is pretty much unplayable on this phone. Emulation-wise, the LG G6 runs almost all emulators with no lag. Consoles like the SNES, Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, Nintendo DS, Dreamcast, and PSP. However, the G6 struggles with more demanding emulators like Dolphin or Citra. In the case of the first, there are some games that are somewhat playable, like in the case of Zelda Wind Waker. Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition is laggy, but it's somewhat playable. I'm not sure if the GameCube version runs better, but probably it does. Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is playable if you lower the graphics and do the following trick. Quickly lower the notification bar when it lags, and somehow you'll notice a significant increase in performance. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it works with some games, and especially emulators. When it comes to the camera, the LG G6 has two 13 megapixel cameras, one of 72 degrees and a wide angle of 125. The main camera was quite good, and I say it was because now it's quite bad because of the lens that I mentioned before. In well-lit scenarios, photos look good, but I have to say there's something I didn't like from day one, that being excessive over sharpening, which is really noticeable when zooming in on photos. Colors come out natural and I like how they look, but I understand it may look a bit drab to some people. The HDR often doesn't activate when it should, so often I had to manually turn it on, but even when it's on, the difference is not that big. Macro photos also come out pretty decent as seen on screen. Since it has a small sensor, it does this job easier than modern flagships with big sensors. Since the G6 lacks a telephoto sensor, we rely only on digital zoom to zoom in on distant objects, so photos look bad, but still I would take an ultra-wide sensor over a telephoto any day. In low light conditions, the G6 struggles like any other phone. Noise levels are high, and thanks to the scratches of the sensor, it handles strong lights rather poorly. But medium mode comes to save the day, and with which you can get some decent looking photos. In my case, I have pretty stable hands, and I can keep the shutter speed up to 2 seconds, which translates to photos with less noise and more detail. But bad thing about this is that there's not always time to play with the settings, so I had to rely on the auto mode to take photos. The wide angle camera is capable of taking good shots as it shares the same sensor as the main camera. In 2017 was the only high-end phone that had this type of camera, and this was one of the reasons why I chose this phone. The wide angle camera takes good photos in good light conditions, but at night with a smaller aperture, the photos are obviously worse than with the main camera, so I rarely used it in these conditions until I killed the main camera, and from that point I started using the wide angle camera most of the time. I also tested the Google camera, which does a decent job, although I don't use it in well lit conditions since the results often vary too much between photos and most of them feel too processed for my taste. In addition, the time it takes to process is too long, and this is annoying because when I take several photos in a row, it often results in corrupted photos. So to avoid this issue, I had to wait until one was being done processed to take the next one. So for that reason, I would rather use the stock camera and from there edit the photo using Lightroom, which at the end would give an even better result. But where the G camera is very useful is to take photos of sunsets, and here honestly it does a great job. Yes, it exaggerates the colors a bit, but I definitely prefer this to a bad photo devoid of information, like the ones the normal camera takes in these conditions. At night, however, the G-Cam takes horrible pictures. It does very strange things such as making everything blue as in this photo, where it looks like a Smurf. Besides, it takes too much time exposing and it feels way too processed. I don't know if I need to change something in settings I'm not aware of, but in my experience the G-Cam is trash in low light conditions. When it comes to video recording, the G6 can record videos up to 4K 30 or 1080p 60. The video itself looks fine, but I recommend deactivating instead recording, which has a tendency to lower the quality of videos. Optical stabilization on the other hand does a decent job, and we can always use Google Photos to further stabilize videos. Also, while we're recording, we can switch between the wide and ultra wide, which is something I can't do on my LG V40, and let alone all the functions they remove like split screen. So in conclusion, my experience with the LG G6 over the last 4 years has been very positive, and for that reason it's one of my favorite smartphones. And despite being 4 years old, this one is perfectly usable, and I still think it's a good option because you can find one for less than $100, and for that price this phone has no competition. I will continue to use the G6 as my secondary phone until I get another one, and with all this said, that's the end of the video, so I'll see you guys the next time. Bye.